Hi there, sweet friends. Welcome back to our cozy little corner of story time. I'm so glad you're here today. Whether you're curled up with a blanket, sipping something warm, or just letting the day slow down a bit, this story is just for you. This tale is gentle, warm, and safe for everyone, little ones, teens and grown-up hearts alike. So take a deep breath, and let's begin our story in the peaceful town of Maplewood. Maplewood was the kind of place where time seemed to stretch like soft dough in the hands of a gentle baker. It was nestled in a valley between two sleepy hills, surrounded by pine trees that swayed like lullabies in the wind. Birds chirped from mossy rooftops, and golden sunlight danced on cobblestone paths. On every corner stood a bakery, a flower shop, or a cozy cafe, and people greeted each other like family. It was in this quiet town that our story begins with a kind-hearted young man named Milo. He wasn't famous or flashy. He didn't own anything expensive or fancy. But what he did have was a deep love for small things: warm bread, whistling robins, and the feeling of socks just out of the dryer. Milo lived in a tiny cottage at the edge of Maplewood, where ivy curled around the windows and squirrels often knocked on the back door hoping for crumbs. Inside, his home smelled of cinnamon and old books. Wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of wild honey, tea leaves, and carefully folded napkins embroidered by hand. Every morning, Milo walked into town with a little satchel slung over one shoulder and a thermos of chamomile tea in hand. He greeted everyone he passed: the grumpy postman who wasn't really that grumpy, the baker who always wore flour on her nose, and Mrs. Fry's peach tree, who watered her roses at precisely 7:00 a.m. But today was a little different. As Milo strolled down Mulberry Lane, sipping tea and humming a tune, he noticed something unusual near the old clock tower. A small crowd had gathered, not panicked, just curious. In the middle of it all stood Officer Bernard, Maplewood's only policeman. He wasn't much for sirens or shouting. In fact, his patrol car had more knitted seat covers than it did equipment. Milo tilted his head. Now what's all this, I wonder? He walked closer, only to see the officer holding something small and green in his hands. "Aha!" Officer Bernard announced with a smile that was more amused than serious. "We've got a case of leafy mischief." Milo stepped forward, blinking in confusion. Leafy? Mischief? The officer turned and pointed not at a person, but at a single potted plant. A fern, to be exact. "This little fellow was taken from Miss Adelaide's porch," Bernard said with a chuckle. "Seems someone borrowed it during the night, and we've got a trail of leaves leading right to your doorstep, Milo." Milo's mouth dropped open, but only for a second. Then he laughed soft and honest, like a breeze through chimes. "Oh, goodness. I think I know what happened." And right then, with sunlight dappling the street and everyone giggling around him, Milo found himself at the center of the gentlest misunderstanding Maplewood had ever seen. But we'll get to that in the next chapter. So for now, take another sip of something warm, feel your shoulders relax, and join me soon for Chapter 2, where the mystery deepens in the most delightful way. Milo stood in the morning sun, blinking at Officer Bernard and the curious onlookers. In the middle of it all sat the missing potted fern, slightly droopy, but otherwise unharmed. "Well," Milo said, scratching his head, "I certainly didn't take Miss Adelaide's fern on purpose, but if it really did end up by my door, I have a hunch who the real culprit might be." The crowd leaned in, as if Milo were about to reveal a grand secret. "Nutters," he said. Everyone blinked. "Nutters?" Bernard asked, raising an eyebrow. Milo chuckled. "My squirrel friend. He visits every day, always poking around in my flower pots, carrying off shiny things, and once tried to bury a whole cinnamon bun in my laundry basket. Wouldn't be surprised if he dragged a fern up the hill thinking it was treasure." Miss Adelaide, a petite older woman with lavender hair and kind eyes, let out a musical laugh. "Oh, darling, if it was Nutters, I suppose I can forgive him. He does have excellent taste in greenery." The group giggled and murmured in agreement. Maplewood was the kind of place where squirrels had reputations, and Nutters was well known for his antics. Still, Officer Bernard adjusted his cap and tried to keep a straight face. "Milo, I'm afraid I'll need you to come with me." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Milo just grinned. "To the station?" he asked, pretending to look worried. Bernard nodded solemnly. "Yes, you have the right to remain. For tea and scones." Mrs. Whittaker just dropped off a fresh batch. Milo playfully placed his hands behind his back. "Well, I suppose I'm under arrest then." The crowd burst into laughter. Children clapped, and someone started humming a little tune. It wasn't often someone got arrested in Maplewood, and certainly not with such fanfare. As they walked together, Bernard leading Milo, and the others trailing behind like a cheerful parade, Milo looked up at the trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches, painting golden freckles across the path. Birds flitted between the hedges. A cat snoozed on a windowsill, completely unbothered by the drama of the morning. At the tiny police station, which looked more like a tea room than a jail, Bernard opened the door with a flourish. Inside, everything was tidy and welcoming: lace curtains, flower vases, and a clock that ticked like a lullaby. "Take a seat, suspect," Bernard teased, motioning to a cozy armchair. Milo chuckled and sat down just as Mrs. Whittaker appeared with a tray of buttery scones, fresh from the oven. "Orange and lavender today," she said with a wink. As Milo took a bite, warm and sweet, he looked around at the little group gathered in the station: friends, neighbors, and even Miss Adelaide, still holding her fern like a newborn baby. "I guess if I had to be arrested," Milo said with a smile, "this is the loveliest way it could have happened." Bernard lifted his teacup. To peaceful crimes and peculiar squirrels, everyone raised their cups. And somewhere in the distance, Nutters peeked down from a branch, munching on a biscuit someone must have dropped. And just like that, the case of the wandering fern turned into an unexpected celebration of friendship, laughter, and the beauty of small-town life. The next morning in Maplewood was even lovelier than the last. Dew sparkled like fairy lights on the grass, and a soft breeze carried the scent of lilacs and freshly baked bread. Birds chirped in cheerful harmony as if they too were excited for what the day would bring. Inside his cozy, ivy-covered cottage, Milo was buzzing with energy. He wore his softest sweater, the one with little stitched sunflowers on the sleeves, and his favorite socks, striped like peppermint candy. His tiny kitchen table was covered in art supplies: glitter, glue, ribbons, buttons, and paper of every pastel shade imaginable. "All right, Nutters," he said, turning to the little squirrel perched on the windowsill, nibbling a walnut. "It's time to say thank you the proper Maplewood way." Nutters twitched his tail as if to say, "About time." Milo had spent the whole evening before making handmade apology cards for everyone who had laughed, teased, and shared tea with him at the arrest. Each card had a cheerful drawing of Officer Bernard, Miss Adelaide's fern, and of course a very mischievous Nutters wearing a tiny hat. Oh yes, the hat. It was the final and most delightful part of the plan. Using scraps of felt and velvet, Milo had crafted a miniature top hat for his squirrel friend, complete with a ribbon band and a feather he found near the garden fence. It took some convincing, and a few extra peanuts, but eventually, Nutters agreed to wear it just long enough to deliver the cards. One by one, they visited the townsfolk. To Miss Adelaide, they brought a card tied with lavender stems and a packet of special fern food. "Oh, Milo, you're too sweet," she said, wiping away a happy tear. To Mrs. Whittaker, they brought a card and a warm cinnamon bun. "I declare," she laughed, "that squirrel has more charm than the mayor." Even Officer Bernard received a card with a hand-drawn badge and the words, "World's Kindest Policeman," in sparkling gold ink. He taped it right to the front of the station door. As Nutters tiptoed along fences and poked his little hat-wearing head into shop windows, people waved, giggled, and gave him treats. It was like a tiny parade, and every heart in Maplewood grew just a little warmer that day. By the time the sun began to set, painting the clouds in soft sherbet colors, Milo and Nutters returned home, tired but glowing with joy. They sat on the front step, sharing a slice of apple pie and watching the fireflies blink in the twilight. "You know," Milo said softly, "sometimes a little mistake can turn into something lovely, like a reason to remind people how much you care about them. Nutters squeaked in agreement, his tiny hat slightly askew, but still dignified. Above them, the stars began to twinkle, and the night air wrapped around the cottage like a soft blanket. And just like that, a small town was reminded once again that kindness, laughter, and a bit of glitter can make even the oddest days into something beautiful. The next morning dawned quiet and soft, the kind of morning that makes you want to stay wrapped in your quilt just a little longer. A soft drizzle tapped gently on the roof, and the whole world seemed to move slower, like it, too, was enjoying the hush. Milo padded down the creaky stairs in his fuzzy slippers, Nutters close behind. He lit a little candle in the kitchen, made 2 mugs of chamomile and honey, one very tiny, and sat by the window, watching the mist curl around the trees. But just as he was about to start his morning crossword, a knock came at the door. Tap, tap. Standing outside in a yellow raincoat, holding an umbrella dotted with painted daisies, was little Elsie from down the lane. In her hands, a very curious envelope. "Morning, Mr. Milo," she chirped. "The postman said this looked interesting, so I said I'd bring it right away." Milo took the envelope gently. It was pale blue, with gold edges and a wax seal stamped with the tiniest squirrel holding a suitcase. "Well, now," Milo whispered, "that's not something you see every day." Nutters stood on his hind legs, eyes wide. Inside was a letter written in swooping, elegant handwriting. It smelled faintly of peppermint and mountain air. "To Mr. Milo of Maplewood, we, the founders of the Woodland Whimsy Society, have heard of your recent fern incident, your community's kindness, your charming squirrel assistant, and your glittering cards have reached our ears and our hearts. It is with great pleasure that we invite you to the annual gathering of gentle troubles and accidental heroism held this year in Lavender Grove. Bring your squirrel. Hats encouraged. Sincerely, Fernley T. Buttonwhistle, Chief Organizer of Whimsy." Milo read the letter twice, then once more, just to be sure. "Well, Nutters," he said, blinking, "it seems we're going on a little trip." Nutters chatted with excitement and leapt in a circle. By mid-afternoon, Milo had begun packing. Not hurriedly, never that, but carefully. A warm scarf, some oat biscuits, a map, with doodles instead of roads, a tiny umbrella for Nutters, and of course, the glitter glue, just in case. Outside, the rain had cleared, leaving behind a fresh, earthy smell. The clouds drifted off like sleepy sheep, and the sun peeked through with a soft yawn. Milo sent a few postcards to let everyone in town know he'd be gone for a few days. Nothing urgent, just a little adventure to follow. Miss Adelaide brought over a scarf she'd knitted, especially for Nutters, complete with a tiny button. Officer Bernard offered to water Milo's garden and promised not to issue any squirrel-related warrants in his absence. As evening fell, Milo and Nutters sat by the fire one last time before their journey, sipping tea and wondering what Lavender Grove might look like. Fields of soft purple, maybe hills covered in velvet moss, perhaps even more squirrels in hats. Whatever it was, Milo knew it would be something good, because when you live gently, love deeply, and keep a sense of wonder close to your heart, beautiful things seem to find you. And in our final chapter, we'll travel to Lavender Grove, where Milo discovers that sometimes even the gentlest souls are braver than they think. The morning of the journey was quiet, with golden mist curling between the hedges. Milo packed his last oat biscuits into a tin, slipped Nutters into a tiny knit scarf, and gave his cottage one final sweep of the eyes as if to say, "I'll be back soon. Don't miss me too much." The train to Lavender Grove puffed gently through the countryside like a dragon who'd forgotten how to roar. Milo and Nutters sat by the window, sharing snacks and watching the scenery roll by. Sleepy cows in sun-dappled meadows, cottages with blue doors, and trees whose leaves whispered ancient lullabies. Lavender Grove was just as lovely as its name promised. A small village nestled between soft hills, its rooftops peeked out from fields of blooming purple. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and fresh rain, and bees buzzed lazily through lace-curtained windows. It looked like a painting come to life, but painted in watercolors. not oils. Soft, calm, dreamlike. At the train platform stood a cheerful older man in suspenders and spectacles, holding a sign that read, Woodland Whimsy Society welcome Milo Nutters. Mr. Button Whistle? Milo asked with a smile. The very one, the man beamed. We've been looking forward to meeting you. You caused quite the stir, you know. The first honorary member invited by squirrel reputation alone. He leaned down to shake Nutter's tiny paw, and Nutters, quite the gentleman, now gave a little bow. They walked together through winding lanes until they reached a meadow filled with picnic blankets, little wooden stalls, and dozens of people and creatures gathered for the annual gathering. There were hedgehogs wearing waistcoats, owls with tiny reading glasses, and a goose who seemed to be in charge of tea service. Everyone was sharing stories, tales of well-meaning blunders and unexpected kindness. One woman told how she'd once baked 100 muffins by mistake and ended up feeding the whole village. Another had tried to paint her fence and accidentally turned her cat pastel blue. The cat didn't mind. In fact, he quite liked the look. And now, it was Milo's turn. He stood under a vine-draped trellis, holding a teacup in one hand and Nutters in the other. He told the tale of the missing fern, the very gentle arrest, the squirrel with impeccable fashion sense, and how it all led to laughter and connection instead of confusion. The crowd listened with warm smiles and misty eyes. At the end, they clapped not loudly, but in a quiet, fluttering way, like wind through tall grass. Fernley T. Button Whistle stepped forward and placed a medal around Milo's neck made of pressed flowers and a single golden acorn. To Milo, he said softly, for reminding us that even small missteps can lead to big kindness, and to Nutters for his sense of adventure and his hat. That night, there was a lantern walk through the lavender fields. Everyone carried a soft glowing light, and laughter floated across the hills like music. Milo walked slowly, his heart full, his feet light, and Nutters fast asleep in the crook of his arm. As the stars blinked above, and the last of the fireflies danced in the dusk, Milo whispered, maybe being arrested was the best thing that ever happened to me. And in the gentle silence that followed, the lavender swayed in agreement. Thank you, dear listener, for joining me in this soft and silly journey. If this story warmed your heart even just a little, I'd love for you to like, subscribe, and come back soon for more peaceful tales. Until next time, may your days be slow and sweet, your tea always warm, and your squirrel always well dressed.